Hey, okay, so just a quick one here. A few people have asked a couple of things about layers, and perhaps we could use this as a quick reminder. What you can do. Yes, there is a layer system. No, it's not as sophisticated as you have in many other programs. That just hasn't gotten the attention. There are so many filters and other things that we do, animation, and there just hasn't been the resource or the time to try to do the same type of layers. I don't want to go into too much details as to in which way exactly they are different, other than to say that when we have some sort of a picture in a layer, it contains only the red, green, and blue channels. It's an RGB channel. So if you paint something and you paint something in another color, of course, this here is the base layer. It's not even really a layer. It's just the base underneath it. In that case here, it's replacing the pixels, right? But if you go, first of all, where are the layers? Where do you enable that? There's the sidebar here, right? You might have hidden it. You might have it on the other side. There's a view layout where you can have the sidebar on the left or on the right. That's probably where you see it by default. So when you have it, when you look at that, there's a couple of items that can be minimized. There's a plus button next to the histogram, for example. There's the colors. It's currently expanded, so minus button, click that. Color swatches. And so you might not see the layers easily until you look for all of those. Just look for these little minus sign or plus signs, and next to that you'll see one that says layers. In fact, it shows that current image, whatever your current image is. This is an easy way to find it, right? You just draw something like a happy face, and then you say, where can you see the happy face, right? so or maybe put some like 2 or 3 colors of rectangular nature, something that sticks out like the flag of France or the Swiss cross or something like that. So you can quite easily find it that way. Once you see that layer, this is the base layer, and there are 3 controls at the bottom and a few more above it, right? So everything here is layers. And what you can do with the layers, once you have a layer, you'll be able to say how it's combined with others. The default mode is not the one you might think if you're used to the GIMP or Photoshop or something like that, where it's replacing or hiding the layers, the pixels from the layers underneath it. And it's doing that automatically without any sort of green screen, blue screen, compositing, magic magenta or something like that, simply by virtue of having, in addition to the red, green, blue color values, also an alpha value that says how opaque or how transparent that pixel is for each pixel. We don't have that here in Dogwaffle. We just have an RGB channel. So the layer will have to be combined in some sort of a algorithmic way, mathematical way, multiplying it, screen combine, additive, subtractive. There's lots of different ways to exploit that, including some that will make it kind of similar to hiding something underneath it by using an erase color that's blue, erasing the layer to blue, and then anything you draw that's non-blue will be opaque, whereas blue remains transparent. So I don't want to go into too many of these. I just wanted to show what you can do in general and then let you explore and find out how that works. What I recommend is that you leave the underlying initial base layer plain white, right? And then, well, unless you need something a little bit different. There's a couple of scenarios that are different. And so let's do this one first. And then down here, you just add a layer. And now the second one that's above has been selected automatically after creating it. That's layer 1. Down here is the original. You see the tooltip, layer 0. It also is white. So we don't know actually which one you're looking at. Well, they're both being multiplied together. Right, and white multiplied by white is still white. I mean, that's if you look at the number that represents white, as a normalized value is 1.0, and so 1 times 1 is still 1, and so the same color comes through. If in fact you were to select this layer and make it a different one, like for instance, say subtract it, well, then you have white minus white. It becomes black, right? Now that's if you have the full opacity of that value, but there is also the opacity control here. So this one here reduces the intensity of that subtraction effect, right, on a per pixel basis. So you get something like a mid-level gray or something like that. Instead of subtracting, you might do some others, and some of these will give you some very different appearances, although with white it's kind of almost all of them the same result. So let's say we have, what do we use layers for? One of the examples that what you can use it for is to just hold some information there temporarily. Right, so you might, for instance, have a sketch or a drawing. I don't have one, so I'm just going to create one, very simple one, sort of a small or medium size airbrush, make it even smaller, and then just draw something here, like maybe a house. Well, that's my house, and there's a door, and there's a window, right? And then maybe some frame and a doorknob, right? So let's say this is something you have in a layer only temporarily because you want to see it. Not that you want to keep it, but you want to use it as a reference. That's one thing you can use the layer for, because then once you have that layer enabled, and maybe you don't need it that intensely, maybe you don't need it in a subtractive mode, maybe you need it just at its original color, or multiply. You see here, as you scrub through that, it shows you a different effect depending on what that mathematical operation does to those pixels, as it combines the upper layer with the lower level, with the pixels from the lower layer. So let's say I'm keeping it here just as default, but I don't want it that intense. You can use that slider here with the opacity to make it just very subtly visible, or just fully saturated at bare value, basically. So again, this is in the upper layer, but now you can go to the lower layer, or another one, one above perhaps. In fact, let's do that. Let's add one more. It's now above it. That one is in multiply mode. So again, white multiplied to the rest below it is not modifying that. And you can now, this layer here is basically a reference image that you can see or hide. And you can select the upper layer and simply start drawing. So let's say you're drawing with an airbrush here. Let's say, where's my brushes? There, airbrush. Just to give you an idea, so if you need something like a red color, you do that, and you paint, and you paint based on those based on those contours that you see from the initial image underneath it, right? So you might do that. You might perhaps fill the door in red, and I'm doing this very coarse and very not so good, but just to give you an idea. Let's say I want some colors like blue for this window, or for this part of it, a different blue, maybe a light blue down here. And again, we use that image in this layer just as a reference. Then when we hide it, well, it's gone. And maybe we just need this one here. We don't need this one anymore, so we can select it and delete it. We don't need this one either. We could delete that or hide it. But then at this time we see this plaid pattern. You probably will want to simply combine them together now, right? Flatten it. So that's what you see here. Flatten the image, right? And so you now are back down to just one image. So that's one thing that you can use layers for. Another thing that you could use them for is just stuff that you want to create and populate into the picture over time and keep them separate. They're not overlapping. They don't affect each other's colors. It's not going to be modifying one color against the other. So you could do something like this here. You could say here in the first layer, I'm going to add a first layer here. That's the base layer 0. This is layer number 1. I'm going to put, I don't know, a circle here. Yeah, that's a circle, all right. And then you take another one and you say there's a green triangle. And then you have another one. And then you have maybe a red, I don't know, square. And then you have, I don't know, let's do yellow something for the last layer. And I don't know, that will be a fish or something like that. So you have now one picture, it seems, but it's really 4 different pictures, right? Each layer here contains just one particular picture, and they are not overlapping. They're side by side. They're in their own colors, and they could also have a mix of similar colors. There could be some green inside this one. There could be some blue this one, red, yellow, everything, right? So these are just separate small pieces that are in their own little universe and also separated. So if at some point you don't need this one, you can hide that layer. And again, it's something that you might use just temporarily to to do some layout. Maybe you're designing a business card and you have some text somewhere, but then a picture somewhere else, and you're trying to reposition one against the other. That's what you can use layers for too. Doesn't matter if it doesn't have that ability to have it hide one against the other. But there's a couple of other things you can do with layers too. I just want to show one more thing. So I'm going to go first, just quickly, just erase all that or flatten it, and then delete this or erase it. So I'm going to explore how to make it look like I have a layer that's actually opaque, right? Because quite often it's appearing transparent or semi-translucent by virtue of the fact that, let's say, for instance, if I have something greenish here, and then I take a different color like red. Normally, if it's in the same layer, it just replaces that. But if I have it in an upper layer here, you are probably used to seeing this appear in red, but not seeing it change color, right? Well, it should stay red. It can only do that if it knows more than the red, green, and blue color. That's the RGB channel in this layer. Well, it doesn't have that information in our implementation. It only has RGB. It doesn't have the extra value of what we call the alpha value that says how opaque or transparent that each of these pixels should be. So you could, however, kind of fake it. You could say, you know what, let's erase it to a different color, and particularly one that's not used in the context of this. Let's say, for instance, blue. So if I use this blue here and I erase to that primary color, that one is now blue, right? And if I say I want to not do a default multiply mode here, but I want to do something that's called bluescreen, then, well, it's a bit of a darker blue, but it would have to be a perfect blue. I can make it lighter to adjust that. But what you can do anyway here this time is see that it's bringing back the white background color of the layer below it, right? So that now if I actually paint something in a color other than blue, like this here, it will remain opaque. Now it may have a little bit of a transition because it's not staying at the same blue. It's gradually getting to a thinner, lighter blue on the edges with that smoothing on the airbrush. So it is not perfect, but it does certainly for some brushes represent an option to create something like this. You could, for instance, with the basic tools, or let's see, what is it, favorite brushes. I'm trying to remember where we have those basic simple brushes, maybe down here, simple, yeah, it's in alphabetic order. So I have a simple brush here. See, that one doesn't have any edges. Now it's kind of jagged, it doesn't have the anti-aliasing, but if that's okay, if you're doing pixel graphic, if you're doing some low resolution stuff anyway, this might be just fine. And it is now in its own layer. So if you erase this, the only thing you're erasing is this upper layer. What you need to do is make sure you're erasing it to that blue color. Probably best if you actually set that color right here as the secondary color, and maybe actually set the values from red, green, blue here. You could do that in a couple of different ways. You could go something like this. There's also some places where you can put the exact value on the blue. Make sure it's fully saturated, something like that. There's a couple of other mechanisms by which you can select the actual color you get. And not just here, there's certainly many more here. There's like RGB values right here. Let's do that, in fact. Let's go to the RGB value and just set there's no red, no green, only blue. So that's the pure saturated blue. And you right-click this, that goes into, or left-click, I guess. If you click this button, it's the primary color. If you click this one, it's the secondary color. No, maybe not. Okay. So here, just switch the two. Now we have the blue here. Now you can erase it, right? It's blue here in the layer preview, but it's not giving you the blue because we are doing the blue screen compositing. The blue screen compositing is showing you, hey, if the pixel is blue, don't show it. That's the trick in compositing, right? When you use green screen, blue screen, or some other colors like drop magenta and magic, there's another one, I forget where it is. You can use a color, you can identify a color that should remain transparent. So if that is the blue color, then you simply erase to blue, and you don't see any difference. You can hide the layer, show the layer. As long as it's erased to blue, you don't see the presence of these pixels. So you can now go to the paintbrush or some other tools like rectangular fill tools, circle ovals, and so on, and perhaps set the size of the brush, set the color again. Let's see, what color tools do we have here? RGB, box tool. Let's take this one. Let's say I want to draw something in yellow, and you can see it in yellow and it remains yellow, right? And then you can have red, you can see it in red or pink or something, and it remains that color. And you can see it in a darker green and it's there. And you see it in a light green and it's there, right? So you have that in a separate layer, and you can have multiple layers, each of them with the blue screen compositing to label a particular layer as a particular color as transparent. The only limitation with that is that if you have colors that are almost the same, or that are in fact the same as the erase color, you're not going to see it. So it limits you a little bit to what colors you use. But that's the same thing if you're doing green screen compositing with video or still photography. You cannot have green eyes, or you cannot, like if you do portraiture and you have a green screen behind, because you're going to composite that in transparent mode, you cannot have green screen, you cannot wear green jewelry or green shirts, because those parts are all going to turn transparent with the green screen in the background too. So that's the thing, that's one of the things you can do in layers. And of course, once you have something in the layers here, you have a lot of filters that can act on that. Like for instance, you can see the transform tool here. You can move this thing around. You can enable the tiling. You can transform it, rotate it, all sorts of things. All that works just fine as if it was a standard layering system. In fact, probably a couple of things we do here that you don't do in those many other programs. So learn to use the green screen or blue screen compositing, and you'll be able to do a lot more if you need to do this through layers. But again, keep in mind, layers are not there only to do this kind of stuff where you hide something below something else, right? Having the transparency or the opacity is one thing you want with layers. It's not by far the only thing. And since Dogwaffle started as a paint program, we really didn't design it to have that automatic hiding of information, but rather see how we would use layers to perhaps brighten or darken something. And that's when these layer modes come in, right? When you have some of these layer modes, what they do is you can use them, for instance, multiplying something against another picture, and the dark parts will make your existing picture darker. The bright parts, like white parts, will leave them unchanged. And that's something that you use a lot if you want to have areas that are darker, but you don't want to work on the colors themselves. You might use basically the value by using a multiply channel or something like that. There's a couple of more sophisticated techniques around that, but that's basically the concept, right? So hope this helps, and of course also hope this answers the questions as to how do you get to these darn layers in the first place. If you have it minimized here, or if you have it on the other side, just look around on your screen or go to the view menu with the layout. Sidebar is on the left. I like it on the right side. Usually that's where I have it. The toolbar that you see here on the left, the narrow toolbar, can also be adjusted a little bit. It could be 2 columns like you see here, especially if you're on a low resolution monitor. That's why it's there as two column options. Typically, most of the time nowadays with high resolution monitors, we'll have it in single column. And as I mentioned, the sidebar, I usually, in my recordings, you will see it most of the time on the right side. So let me stick it back there on the right, and there it is. And that's it. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.